everyone. It has been a long week. I apologize for being radio silent for so long, but this was just a really, really busy week for me. Not bad, just really busy. Work had me in a lot of meetings, and it was my mom's birthday this week, so we had to celebrate for that. And I got a new computer, which I'm using to film a video for the first time ever right now as we speak. So we'll see how well this equipment works out. And the old one was just starting to get ready to crap out. And rather than push it across the finish line, I said, let's just... I've saved some money during the pandemic, so I figured I might as well put it to good use and get myself a new computer. So that is that. Because of all of that and setting up the laptop and moving all my files over onto this one, in addition to all the other work I was doing this week, it was a pretty hectic week, to say the least. So I apologize for not only not getting this video out to you sooner, but also the live stream that I did for NXT Takeover 31 got pulled down, got copyright striked by WWE. So I guess next time I do this, I'm going to have to do it with headphones on to make sure that the audio doesn't come across on the video, because that was enough to get a copyright strike. I'm like, man, they don't play around. But thank you to everyone that participated in the live stream. We did finish the show. It just never posted, unfortunately. And for those of you who didn't get to hear it, I'm sorry. Blame WWE and YouTube. God, it's like that's the second time I've had one of my live streams pulled. It makes me a little skittish about trying it again. But before I go into the weekly movie and television show reviews, of which there are quite a few this week, actually, this video came so late that we're actually crossing over to the ones that I had planned for next week, but hey, what are you going to do? I want to talk about the WWE Draft and the results that happened on Smackdown this week, and I want to talk a little bit about Retribution and Mustafa Ali being revealed as the leader, and I won't go in depth over NXT Takeover 31. If you were there on the live stream, you pretty much know how I felt about it. But for those of you who didn't see it, I will give my quick impressions of that show. So I guess we'll start with NXT TakeOver, since that was the longest time ago, first chronologically of the topics that I'll be covering. And NXT TakeOver 31, I thought that the effort from the wrestlers was very, very high, as expected from NXT. You don't expect them to take a night off when it comes to these shows. Intrigue and storyline-wise, it was one of their weaker shows. This is probably the first time I watched a TakeOver and felt like the wrestlers were trying to make up for deficiencies in creative. And normally that's something you see on like main roster WWE, like Raw and SmackDown. But here it felt like the guys were trying to make up for weaker material. And that feels wrong for NXT, because typically they're very, very consistent creatively, and what they do creatively typically lives up to what they're doing in the ring. But here it felt like the in-ring stuff was trying to overcompensate for the fact that they just didn't have a whole lot going for them creatively. Johnny Gargano still doesn't work as a heel. The fact that he lost just makes him look even more pathetic. I didn't like the referee shenanigans with the Garganos in the women's title match. I felt like that kind of took that match lower than where it probably would have been otherwise. I wasn't a huge fan of the Velveteen Dream Kushida match, mainly because it just felt like an extended squash. And it just felt like, so Dream's on the way out, right? It felt like he was being punished with this match, so I don't know. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, I don't know. That's how it came across to me. And I thought the Cruiserweight title match did really well. It was a spot-festy, flip-floppy type of match, but it was action-packed and better than I would have expected from a match that I had absolutely no interest in going into it, outside of the fact that I like both guys, mainly for their work in Lucha Underground, but I thought they delivered an overall pretty solid match. And the main event was really good. I really enjoyed the main event. A nice, hard-hitting, ground and pound, blood and guts wrestling type of match. Finn Balor versus Kyle O'Reilly. Really enjoyable stuff. At no point was I convinced that Kyle was going to win, but that was the case going in. So they went in there and just had a very different match from what was on the rest of the show. And overall, it came off really well. I thought the ending was a little weak. When I say ending, I mean the ending to the show, the post-match, where Ridge Holland came out with an unconscious Adam Cole, and I guess they were trying to set him up for a big push. Unfortunately, he got injured on on NXT this week. So pretty much kills whatever they were going to do there. Who knows what the plan was there. But a very awkward, out-of-nowhere ending for the show. I was like, all right, what the hell was that? That was weird. And it felt like an excuse to get Adam Cole on the show more than anything else. But NXT Takeover, like I said, the effort from the wrestlers was strong, creative not so strong. So we'll balance that out to a C. I wasn't miserable while watching it. Again, it had that quicker pace that the NXT Takeovers tend to have, which is always welcome. But yeah, not one of my more favorite takeovers, unfortunately, for the reasons that I described. Now let's get into Retribution, who continues to dig their own grave with... now we have Mustafa Ali revealed as the leader of the group. The problem with doing that... and this is the problem when you have mystery guys. When you have a mystery, it's got to be a big name under the mask. It's got to be somebody that will legitimately shock people and make them go, whoa, what's going on here? Again, even though these weren't masked men, I take it back to the NWO and Hogan being revealed as the third man. Looking back on it, Hogan's the only one that could have possibly worked. But when you have Mustafa Ali and you reveal him as the leader, it's like he probably should have been the leader from the get-go, making it a mystery and then revealing Mustafa Ali, who, you know, is a talented athlete. He's not an intriguing character. He's not. So when I heard, because I didn't watch Raw this week, when I heard that Mustafa Ali was revealed as the leader, I was like, okay. And again, compare that to Hogan and the NWO, where I did not see Bash to the Beach live. So when people told me that Hogan was the third man, I was like, holy shit, I gotta watch Nitro tonight. Jesus Christ. And this is before the internet. And Mustafa Ali, it just feels like a desperate attempt to try and save a concept that's just not working. And it's like, all right, we got to do something with Mustafa Ali. And I was like, whatever. I don't really care. It's not going to make me want to tune into Raw. Now, I know I said on a previous video that I was going to start watching Smackdown, mainly because I am intrigued by heel Roman Reigns. Unfortunately, the draft came up, so I have not watched Smackdown at all, because I figured, all right, let's wait for the draft to pass, and then whichever show Roman Reigns ends up on, which is most likely, well, actually, first results, he's going to wind up staying on SmackDown. But I was like, let's see where Roman Reigns ends up, and then I'll watch that show moving forward. He's staying on SmackDown, so I will try to make sure to remember to watch SmackDown on Fridays, or at least watch it on Saturdays the next morning. Unfortunately, it's just not habitual for me to watch SmackDown. So reminding myself, even if I have like a reminder on my phone or something, like getting into the habit of watching SmackDown again is going to be very hard to do for me. So hopefully, hopefully Roman Reigns is enough to keep me intrigued, and hopefully they've got other stuff going on there. I know that The Fiend and Alexa Bliss are doing their thing together, but I haven't watched any of it. So we'll see how that all goes. But I do want to talk about the results of the WWE Draft. The way it was set up, to my understanding, again, I didn't watch the show, but for every 2 picks that SmackDown gets, Raw gets 3, which I guess it's 1 pick per hour of programming, I think is the logic there. But the 2 champions are going to stay. Drew McIntyre is staying on Raw, and Roman Reigns is staying on SmackDown, which is probably for the best. Asuka, the Raw Women's Champion, is staying on Raw. Seth Rollins is going to SmackDown. The Hurt Business is staying on Raw, keeping the U.S. title. Bobby Lashley is the U.S. champion. Then in the second pick, Sasha Banks is staying on SmackDown, I guess. Again, I don't know who's on what show anymore, but because I haven't been watching. But Bianca Belair is either going to SmackDown or staying on SmackDown. I'm not sure which. AJ Styles is going to Raw. Naomi's going to Raw. Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler are going to Raw, although it doesn't matter because they have the belts that float across all the shows, so it doesn't really matter. Then with the third pick, Ricochet is staying on Raw. Mandy Rose is going to Raw. Miz and John Morrison are going to Raw. Jey Uso is staying on SmackDown. Rey and Dominic are going to SmackDown. And then in the final pick, the New Day... Okay, this is interesting. The New Day are going to Raw as the SmackDown Tag Team Champions, and Big E is staying on SmackDown. So the New Day has been effectively broken up from the original group that we all grown to know and love over the years. I think it was time. I think the act has long run its course. And I had periods when I was really high on the New Day, but they've really kind of worn out their welcome. So I think any attempt to kind of freshen them up individually, whether it be Kofi's run as WWE Champion or whatever they have planned for Big E as a single star, I think is ultimately like a step in the right direction for everyone involved. Maybe they'll unify the tag titles because that's something that's long overdue. Because I said one of the biggest problems with WWE, they have too many belts, And having two sets of tag champions is just ridiculous. But any case, Raw also got Dana Brooke and Angel Garza, and SmackDown keeps Otis. So it doesn't sound like a whole lot was really changed, at least based on what I'm seeing here. Also, Lars Sullivan returned to SmackDown, but will be added to Raw's draft pool of superstars, whatever the hell that means. So Lars Sullivan is back. I forgot he even existed, to be perfectly honest. So anyway, so really my big takeaway from the draft is that the New Day is kind of sort of split up, and although not entirely. And Roman Reigns is staying on SmackDown. Those are my two major takeaways from this. So with all of that said, I'm going to watch SmackDown moving forward just to see what they continue to do with Roman Reigns, because I legitimately find his new character interesting. Will that stay true? I don't know, but I'm going to at least give SmackDown a couple of shows to see if Roman Reigns is enough to carry it in, make me interested in watching on Friday nights. Now, for this week's reviews, I'm going to try and get through these super, super quickly because I'm already late with these, and I don't want to do too much editing on these videos. So let's just go right into it. So before I get into the horror movies and Halloween-themed films that I watched, or that I will be watching for October, I did watch something on TV that I found very interesting and very relevant to current times, and that is South Park's Pandemic Special. And really, I don't want to give away too much about this, but what I will say is that South Park is great at social commentary. That's been their hallmark for years and years and years now, most of the time that they've been on the air. And this is a time where we desperately needed South Park to comment on some of this crap, because the current year, 2020, has been awful. So any kind of commentary from South Park is completely welcome, and I thought they hit it out of the park. I thought it was a very entertaining special. It was more than welcome given the circumstances of everything. It was very funny, and at times it was very heartfelt, and you felt, I don't want to give it away, but there was, one of the characters has a breakdown at one point, and it's kind of heartbreaking and kind of echoes how I think a lot of us are feeling right now in the midst of all this. But the best thing about 2020 is that it is a goldmine for jokes, and South Park took advantage of most of the pandemic-related jokes. I think there's a lot of political humor and a lot of current events humor that they could have dove even more into. But as far as covering the pandemic stuff, I thought they did a really, really good job. And again, it was a welcome thing to watch. So thank you, Matt and Trey, for giving this to us. Now, when I said I was going to be doing horror movie reviews, I said I wasn't going to review the movies that I've already talked about on this channel in the past. You know, the Nightmare on Elm Streets, the Halloweens, the Exorcists, those type of movies. But one classic that I rewatched this week, and I don't believe I've ever talked about. If I have, I've forgotten about it. I'm sorry, but the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, one of the all-time great classic horror movies, and one of the most influential horror movies of all time, one that you continue to see its fingerprints on horror movies today. Like, the entire slasher genre probably owes some of its existence to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I don't think I've ever talked about it before, so I'll go ahead and do that now. It's the movie that made Leatherface. I incorrectly called him Leatherhead on Twitter. I blame that on the beer I was drinking at that time, but no, his name is Leatherface. Made him a horror movie icon. And this movie has been, again, you can see the influences of this movie on many, many, many movies that have come after it. Actually, a couple of the movies that I'm going to be talking about later were clearly inspired by Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And the way I've always described this movie to people, it is the ECW of horror films. That's the best way to describe it, where it's dirty, grimy, low budget, low rent, but completely independent and completely goes against the grain, and is, for the time it was made in, is wildly creative, and it's easy to see why it was able to generate such an influence and why it was as powerful as it was, because it is unapologetically brutal. Now, it's not super gory. I think there are plenty of movies I've seen that are way more gory than Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but the way it handles its violent kills, even if you don't see everything that goes on, there's one in particular where Leatherface, I did it again, where Leatherface puts one of his victims up on a meat hook and hangs her on a meat hook. You don't really see anything, and the way they cut around it, you kind of don't really see it, but the implication of it and the music and the way it's shot and everything, you can almost feel the meat hook going in. And that's the best way to describe a lot of the more horrific, gorier moments of the film, where it's really not as gory as some other horror movies you've probably seen, but you feel it. You definitely feel the pain and the death that these victims are going through as they're all picked off one by one, as most slasher movies do. And, you got to admire all the slasher villains. They all have their trademark weapon. Jason has his machete. Freddy has the finger knives. Michael Myers has the kitchen knife. God damn it, I keep doing it. I've got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the brain. Maybe that's what's wrong with me. But Leatherface has the chainsaw. And I think that could probably beat all of those. But really, I think what really sells the movie for me, and I've said this about Halloween in the past, when you look at Halloween and the whole chase sequence of Michael Myers, of Jamie Lee Curtis, Laurie Strode, throughout the ending of that film, it's one of the all-time great horror movie chases ever. Halloween was done in a little bit more, even though it did have its low budget and more independent qualities, that was done in a way that was more digestible for mainstream audiences. Texas Chainsaw Massacre has a very similar ending, and it actually predates Halloween, with the last victim trying to escape from this demented family that she winds up being captured by, with Leatherface, his brother, the hitchhiker, who I think is scarier than Leatherface is, to be perfectly honest. His introductory scene is one of the most unsettling things I've ever seen in a movie. And that whole sequence at the end, the chase, again, it's very effective, much like Halloween, but it's a lot grittier and it's a lot more unapologetic in how gruesome it can get. And it's very tense and dramatic as well. It's one of the most iconic scenes in the history of the genre. So Texas Chainsaw Massacre is an absolute masterpiece. I cannot believe I haven't talked about it prior to now, but it is a gem. And if you haven't seen it, do yourselves a favor and go check it out. Next up is an entire trilogy of films, all written and directed by one Rob Zombie. That would be House of a Thousand Corpses, The Devil's Rejects, and last year's Three from Hell, the most recent release. Now, the first movie came out in 2003, and if you look at the poster here, you can definitely see influences from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just by looking at the poster. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Hills Have Eyes, films like that, kind of those old school, kind of grindhousey type of horror movies, and that's really the appeal of these films more than anything else. They do feel like they belong in the era they were made in, based on how they're shot and everything. But there's definitely a foot in that old school kind of groundhousey style of horror, like the Wes Cravens and Tobe Hooper, that type of deal. So it feels like a mesh of eras almost. And Rob Zombie, who also made the Halloween remake and a sequel to that remake. I guess I'll take this opportunity to give my feelings on him as a filmmaker. It's not very high, to be honest. I think he's got a lot of passion and he's got a lot of great ideas, but I think he'd probably be better off developing a story and then handing it off to other people. Although I guess you could say these movies have their own unique style, because who else is going to direct a movie quite like Rob Zombie? I think he approaches these movies with a lot of passion for whatever he does, and I think that definitely shines through. But when you watch something like House of a Thousand Corpses, that thing is so poorly edited and so haphazardly put together that the entire thing almost feels like an acid trip. Maybe that was the intent, I don't know. But in House of a Thousand Corpses, we are introduced to a young group of teenagers who all get... of course, they all get murdered, but here they come across a horror-themed attraction put together by Captain Spaulding, played by Sid Haig, the late great Sid Haig, who's the best thing in all three movies. The Captain Spaulding clown character is wonderful. You almost can't picture these movies without him. And he, as part of the attraction, he reveals the story of Dr. Satan, and these kids become inspired to go look for Dr. Satan and try to unravel the mystery of the story, and that lands them in the house of the Firefly family with a mama and then a couple of deranged children, some of them mutilated, some of them just deranged and violent. You've got Otis, who kind of is like the main, I don't want to say the main family member because we find out who that is in the sequels, but he's kind of like the long arm of the family that does their evil, violent will without a moment's notice. Also the scariest one of the group, especially when you watch The Devil's Rejects. You got Baby, who's played by Rob Zombie's wife, and plays kind of like almost like a Harley Quinn type of character. Watching her performances in these 3 films and how it evolves over the course of 3 films, I look at it and go, she probably could have played Harley Quinn. Maybe, I don't know. She's probably my favorite character of the bunch, aside from Captain Spaulding, who's outstanding. But, she's Rob Zombie's wife. You wouldn't expect her to be kind of a show stealer, but she kind of is. And it manages to be one of the best aspects of all 3 films. And there's the big guy named Tiny, of course, because that's funny. And so this twisted family, again, it kind of feels like something like The Hills Have Eyes or Last House on the Left and films like that, where a couple of innocent, naive morons come across like a bunch of violent murderers and are brutally murdered in the process themselves. So, really this movie is... It is poorly edited. It is very haphazard. You feel like you're on an acid trip the entire time while watching it. But the evil family is fun. They make for fun, memorable characters that would ultimately carry them into the sequels. Now, Devil's Rejects, I will say, is easily the best one of the 3. I would even go as far to say the best movie that Rob Zombie's ever made. It's the only one of the bunch that I would actually call a good movie. And I understand, like, House of a Thousand Corpses has a cult following, and because of that cult following, people were probably a little excited for 3 from Hell. And because of the success of House of a Thousand Corpses, it led to Rob Zombie getting the part with Halloween and everything. But of all the movies he's done, I think Devil's Rejects is by far his best one. It's not even close in my eyes. And I don't even know if this was intentional, but I think what makes this movie work so well, or works as well as it does, is... kind of the role reversal we get, where the Firefly family is on the run and doing horrible, despicable, really, really awful things, violent things to people. I won't go into details of the stuff they do, but some of it's really, really bad. And we also find out that Captain Spaulding is actually the patriarch of the family. Before, he was just kind of a side character in House of a Thousand Corpses. And here, we find out he's actually part of the family. And that, of course, gives us more Sid Haig, who absolutely steals the show here. He's wonderful in this role. And for all the horrible things they do, and the law enforcement is constantly chasing after them and trying to find a way to capture them. And it even comes to a point where 2 bounty hunters are hired, the Unholy Two, played by Danny Trejo, and my guy, DDP. Feel the bang. I remember the first time I watched this, I totally popped when DDP came up on screen. And he does really well here. And he's bigger than you think he is. That's the thing. When you watch him in wrestling, he doesn't seem that big. But then you see him in something like this where he's with normal-sized people. It's like, dude, DDP is huge. But he adds a lot to the film for sure. And I think when you get to that role reversal where the law enforcement captures them and then tortures them mercilessly, it's like, all right, how far is too far? Like, I understand, and I'm the type of guy normally when in real life, when somebody does something really bad, it's like, if somebody raped a child and then got castrated by the father or the mother, I'm like, it's like, I don't really feel sorry for the dude. But this movie kind of asks that question, like, how far is too far to get back at people that do horrible things? Because the way the role reversal almost works out, you almost kind of feel sorry for the Firefly family at the end. And I think presenting that question or presenting that whole concept right there on screen, I think made the movie a lot better than it would have been otherwise. And I think, again, it's easily the best of Rob Zombie's films. And I don't even know how much of it was intentional, but the things that make the film good are really, really good. So Devil's Rejects, if you watch only one of these 3 films, that's the one you absolutely should watch. I think it's pretty damn good. And that leads us to 2019's 3 from Hell, which I watched for the first time this past week. I wasn't that excited for it when it first came out because I felt like Devil's Rejects was good enough. I don't really need a continuation of that. I like the ending with them barreling down on the police blockade and getting ready to get into a shootout with them. I was like, that's a pretty good ending, I think. Kind of a nice, like, Thelma and Louise style ending for them. And but no, they come back. It turns out they miraculously survived the shootout. And the 3 of them, Captain Spaulding, Baby, and Otis, were arrested and have been kept in prison for a good 20 years. Now, unfortunately, the biggest problem with the film right off the bat is that Sid Haig is not in the film for a majority of it, mainly because his health had declined considerably by the time it came time to shoot this film. And he actually passed away a few days after this film was released. And he only gets one scene in this film, and it's revealed that his character dies in prison. Oh, my laundry's done. But anyway, it's revealed that he died in prison. But we do get an interview with him in characters, Captain Spaulding and everything, and he's absolutely great, as you would expect, but he doesn't look like he's in the best of health. So it's kind of sad to see him like that, but it's also kind of cool to see him deliver one last cool monologue before we say goodbye to the character. But not having him here means that they have to get another family member, who I believe is a cousin, and they get him to kind of take Captain Spaulding's place. And he's clearly saying a bunch of things that were clearly scripted for Captain Spaulding and would have been Captain Spaulding's role, basically, had Sid Haig been healthy enough to actually participate in the film at large. So we don't have Sid Haig for most of the film, which is unfortunate. And the new guy who they get to replace him, I couldn't even tell you who he was. He left no impression on me. It was just I just missed Captain Spaulding the entire time, and that was the biggest problem. And once again, the three of them, the three that are left, the cousin and then Baby and Otis, they escape from captivity and then are on the run. And that's basically the movie, and that's kind of it. Like, they get away and they kill some people, and then they flee to Mexico, where they fight off a gang of luchador gangsters. I'm not making this up. And then that's kind of the movie, and it's like, that's it. And it just feels very small, but not in a good way. It just feels like a mishmash of ideas. Like, they had ideas, but not structure, and I think that's the biggest problem with it. That said, the two cast members left over, Otis and Baby, I think are really good. And I would think, arguably, Sherry Moon, Rob Zombie's daughter, or Rob Zombie's wife, is probably the best performance in the film, as her character's become way more unhinged while in captivity. So she's at least entertaining, but the film, easily skippable. It's not a worthy sequel to Devil's Rejects, and it's just kind of like, I guess if you really like House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects, and you just want to see more of these characters, you should probably check this out. But personally, I was fine with just having The Devil's Rejects, to be honest with you. So, yeah, I'm very conflicted on these films, because clearly there's aspects of it that I really like. Again, I really like Captain Spaulding. I really like the Firefly family. I really like a lot of what was done in The Devil's Rejects. But I think Rob Zombie is not a traditional filmmaker, and it kind of shows, especially in House of a Thousand Corpses, which he himself has even admitted. So, and Three from Hell just feels like another attempt to try and cash in on something that's a little long in the tooth, and to try and squeeze a little bit more water out of that cactus, and I just don't think anything was there. So, overall, I don't hate the movies for sure, and Devil's Rejects I absolutely highly recommend. You should probably check that out. But other than that, unless you're into this type of thing, it's probably not going to be for you. Now we're going to go into something a little bit more old school, something a little bit more into the past. And last week I talked about the Universal Monsters Blu-ray collection and the various movies that were included in that. This is one of the movies that was not included, and one I think I may have mentioned briefly, but Abbott and Costello Meet the Killer. Now, the reason I decided to watch this movie, which I had never watched before, but after watching through all the other Universal Monster movies and getting to the Abbott and Costello monster comedy films, to me it was kind of sad that when you look at Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, they were with Bela Lugosi, they were with Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman, but unfortunately Boris Karloff was not playing the Frankenstein monster. He had long since walked away from that role. The last time he played him was in Son of Frankenstein. So we didn't get to see Karloff interact with Abbott and Costello. But we did here in this film, and that was the main attraction for me. It's like, all right, let's see how Boris Karloff can do interacting with these knuckleheads. And basically, it's not so much a horror film as it is a murder mystery, where a murder takes place in a hotel, and Lou Costello's character is blamed for it because he's the incompetent bellhop that had a run-in with this guy earlier in the day. So he's like the number one suspect and is being made to look like he did it. And all the other people in the hotel that are suspects are trying to make it look like he did it. And that's where Boris Karloff comes in. He's a swami that a lot of people in the hotel rely on for some kind of fortune-telling advice or whatever. And hypnotism as well. And he tries to, in what was the best scene in the movie, he tries to hypnotize Lou Costello into A, confessing, and B, killing himself. Just to wipe away all possible evidence that could be linked to anybody else. And that scene was the funniest scene in the entire movie, and worked because it was Boris Karloff acting as he would in any other of these monster movies, or horror movies, or whatever, giving a fairly straight performance, and then interacting with this comedic personality. And I think that contrast is what makes it funny. I said this last week. And that scene was effective. Unfortunately, the rest of the movie suffers from dragging out way too long, and to the point where the mystery itself becomes uninteresting. And there are a few funny gags in there, but unfortunately, it's just not a... The movie doesn't work as a cohesive whole, and that's unfortunate, but you do get a couple of highlights with Boris Karloff and a couple of good jokes from Abbot and Costello, so there is that. But this is not, unless you're a completist, this is not one that you absolutely need to go out of your way to see. The novelty of Karloff interacting with Abbot and Costello is unfortunately not enough to save the film, because it's very minimal. He doesn't interact with them that much. Like I said, that one scene I talked about is easily the best scene in the movie. And I would have liked to have gotten more of that. I wish Karloff was the killer. He's not. Sorry to spoil it. And I think that would have been a lot more fun. But for what we have, like I said, a couple of funny moments here and there. Karloff's great as usual, but overall not a very good film. And finally, let's close out with another old school one, and one that also includes Boris Karloff, but not from Universal. From RKO Pictures, we have The Body Snatcher. Not Invasion of the Body Snatcher, but The Body Snatcher, starring Boris Karloff, based on a short story by Robert Louis Stevenson, who you may know was the author of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, for all you horror fans out there. He's also known for writing Treasure Island, which is his other probably most famous piece of work. But we get another one of his adaptations here in The Body Snatcher, which is a period piece. It takes place in the 1830s, and it details Boris Karloff as a grave-digging... tell me if this sounds familiar. Boris Karloff is working... Okay, before he was the result of the grave digging, when he played Frankenstein, or the Frankenstein monster, I should say. And here, he's the grave digger as he's digging up corpses and using it in some weird experiments with this guy, this doctor, who he's holding information over. And a lot of dark secrets and a lot of intrigue going on, and a wonderfully creepy performance from Boris Karloff. Now, Bela Lugosi is also in this film in a much smaller role, but he's so subdued compared to how he normally is that you almost forget that the character's even him. It's probably his most subtle performance ever, but unfortunately that means he's one of the more forgettable parts of the movie, which feels wrong. I feel like Bela Lugosi should be one of the shining stars of anything that he's a part of. I mean, even in the Ed Wood movies that he was in, it's like, yeah, but he's great, you know? But really, what makes the movie work better than anything is Boris Karloff. His wonderfully creepy and mysterious performance, as he's like, seems to relish holding secrets over the main character. And there's a lot of intrigue and tension that's built up throughout the course of the film as this doctor has to, you know, fight with his own moral questions and what he needs to do to get out from under this guy's foot, as it were. And I don't want to give away too much because, again, I just highly recommend checking out the film. But this is one I had never seen before. I never crossed paths with it. And I think the main reason is because it's not one of the Universal films. So when I think of Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, I typically go for their work in the Universal films because that's how I know them. You know, Dracula's, the Frankensteins. And they had worked in other studios and had other roles. And I think this is a good example of what Boris Karloff was capable of outside of that Universal monster movie formula and that kind of style. Because this doesn't feel like one of the classic Universal monster films. It's not like... It doesn't feel like a studio trying to replicate what Universal did, but it is creepy enough and it's solidly written and acted enough to feel like its own thing. And if you're a fan of Boris Karloff, I highly recommend checking this one out. I think it's a good one. And that is all I have for you in these reviews. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. And once again, I apologize for getting this out so late, but everything was just hectic this week. I will have more videos for you next week. And Weekday Warriors of Wrestling, the next episode of the podcast, is actually going to be filmed tomorrow morning, so we'll probably get that up on Monday, so be on the lookout for that. But that is all I have for you right now. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you all later.